Diana had barely had time to process the current moment. It felt like the second they had dealt with Amit, had snatched up this Dragonball, of which the new team she had just dedicated her fealty to had sought, of which they now possessed 3. They were just off. They had gathered into the vehicle that her team members had owned, one that looked like it would sooner move across the ground than be carried into the sky, and they got in and simply soared away from the area, from their former battle site. Even in Diana's new position, below her new vantage point, she could still see it, see the aftermath of their fight, see the people scrambling outside of their homes in Amit's former cult, who were looking around like they were lost, like they had just awoken from a fog that had lulled them into a never-ending dream. Every single member of that little group had seemed so lost, but her team wasn't staying to look after them. That wouldn't work, she knew that. Her new teammates were fighters, mostly. They had done their job simply by helping these people. Simply by fighting the god who had deigned to rule over them. They didn't have the manpower to stay behind and help them rebuild, but she knew for a fact that her own people did. The Amazons. There were enough of them to fight and kill Amit, but still remain here with the survivors for the next few months. And even enough after that to send people off to look for the stones, and yet they didn't do anything. Hey, Diana. Diana blinked, Goku's voice drawing her attention. Goku handed her something, some kind of box with an antenna coming out of it. She furrowed her brow. Do you want some juice? Oh, she muttered to herself, as she stared at the strange contraption below her. She had never seen a non-wooden straw before, let alone the strange container that this juice came in. She grabbed the box, sipping on the end of it, as Goku sat next to her. She had to admit, it was surprisingly good, better than any juice she had on her island. As the two sat side by side, Diana watched as the people in front of her were working on something. Before the duo, Tony, Shuri, and Bulma were fiddling with the radar, trying to pick up the next signal. Diana couldn't even begin to understand the complexity in working a machine like that. It might as well have been magic as far as she knew, but she didn't know of any magic that would be able to accomplish something similar. Where are we going next? She asked into the air. Goku shrugged next to her. It's between a couple of places, right? He asked absentmindedly. Bulma nodded. If I had to guess, our best bet would be right about here? She pointed at a section of the map. The power readings are pretty strong, but not strong enough to be one of your parents, for example. She swallowed hard, remembering being in the presence of the 3 aliens from another world. The ones who could possibly wipe out entire continents if they put their mind to it. Boy, was she glad they were on their side. Okay, then where's the signal? Kal-El asked, scratching his head. It looks like San Francisco, Bulma responded. An old military base. It must have been abandoned for... Tony immediately shot to his feet, staring down the map. Wait, that base. His hand shook slightly at his side before he stilled himself. I think that's where Steve Rogers... Wait, Steve Rogers? No way! Bulma dropped her tools to the ground, Shuri doing the same. Are you certain of this? Shuri asked Tony, who nodded slowly. My grandfather was the one who helped Cap in his early days. Tony grabbed his shaking hand. My dad must have told me 1,000 different stories about those days, but I just... But what would the US military be doing with a Dragon Ball? They shouldn't even know they exist. T'Challa asked from the front, co-piloting their vehicle alongside Granola, though co-piloting might have seemed a bit generous, especially considering the fact that T'Challa was doing most of the work. Even as a much younger child, he seemed to have a significantly better grasp of piloting than the older boy, especially considering the fact that Granola had just walked or been flown everywhere for most of his life. I don't think it would be the military, Tony corrected, pondering to himself. The others drew their eyes towards him, Diana speaking first. Did you not just say that this was an installation belonging to the military? She asked, Tony nodding. Well, yeah, but they stopped using it after Cap happened, Tony said, stroking his chin. There was an attack there at the same time that the serum was administered for the first time, and the area was compromised, Bulma realized. Using it anymore, especially during a war, would have been nothing but reckless. So if the military is not using it, does that mean somebody else is? Kal-El asked. I guess that would make sense, Tony confirmed. Yeah, sure, it would make sense with the data, Granola finally spoke up. But anybody who knew even the slightest bit about this captain guy's experiment would be able to narrow down their spot in an instant if they picked up the signal in that city. Was it really necessary to dock themselves there? It's like a friggin' lightning beacon. Wilma tilted her head down slightly. It was good news for them that it was in such a recognizable spot, but something about that seemed off to her. Were they really that lucky? Yeah, she decided, they were. They had their run of bad luck with the crocodile lady. They were probably just being paranoid. Just being stupid. This is stupid. Peter had heard that the whole walk from the ship. The voices behind him bounced between Raditz and Gamora, but the content was the same. This time, that sentence belonged to Gamora. The last signal you saw drop off the map was 50 feet north, yeah? Peter asked, already knowing the answer. It was just a good way to get the girl off his back for a moment. The girl sighed. Yeah, we're practically on top of it, but there's nothing in sight. So this Vegeta guy must have pretty good power output. He's practically a walking bomb. Not to mention his partner, Peter said, tilting his head slightly. They were destroying installations one by one, leaving a path of nothing but destruction in their wake. Efficient and deadly. Honestly, probably a lot more powerful than the main faction attacking the city. Those guys were practically being torn apart by the second. They had lasted about 90 minutes so far since they had left their ship, but whoever was responsible for leading the main siege was, well, they were either inexperienced or just plain stupid. The few communications that they had decrypted, mostly thanks to Gamora repairing the Universal Translator, had shown that, despite around a quarter of the city having been reduced to rubble, the Skrulls were confident that they'd get a handle on things soon, especially since the Super Skrulls had finally taken the field. And from what little communications they had picked up, those guys were outright terrifying. Peter might have not fought in the Super Skrulls himself, but he knew enough about them to know that whoever had invaded the city was about to be really, really sorry about it. Rest in peace, future corpses. Peter shrugged at his own thoughts. A thought crossed his mind then. The unit hunting the Skrulls were clearly stronger around the edge, instead of in the main faction where they should be. And from some of the stories Reddit's told him about Vegeta, Peter had a feeling that the guy would throw this Freezer guy's soldiers under the bus at the first opportunity. He didn't sound like the kind of guy to let go of a grudge, especially not one as big as killing most of his species that easily. Hey, Raditz, what do you think the odds are that Vegeta planned this whole thing? Peter raised an eyebrow. Just think about it. The guy probably hates being conscripted into Frieza's massacre crew, right? Especially since Saiyans have the whole Heroes of Justice thing going on. Yeah, I guess that stands to reason, Raditz replied warily. But, especially since you've gone on about how smart the guy is, I think it's probably smart to assume that he hasn't been sitting on his hands the entire time he's been in the military. He probably put himself into a position of power, where he could wield a good amount of influence, Gamora realized, Peter rolling his eyes. Well, you stole my line, dude, he replied, Gamora rolling her eyes back. Anyway, if that's true, if Vegeta's the one calling the shots, then maybe he led them all into this mess on purpose, like he blew up his own captors. Raditz stroked his chin for a moment. If that was the case, it had easily a dozen different implications, any one of which could match the shit they found themselves in now. But he could tell from the grin on Peter's face which one he was leaning towards. You think he's making an escape? Peter punched Raditz on the arm with a toothy smile on his face. Think about it. Everybody here is weaker than him. You think any competent military is gonna let that happen? You do make a decent point, Gamora acknowledged. It certainly didn't seem logical for someone like Frieza, or the Viltrumite who Frieza let lead his forces, make this kind of suicide charge. The force inside the city had to be the most important faction, so it didn't make sense for them to be doing as poorly as they were. Especially when there was a much stronger team off to the side, one that hadn't gotten involved with the main faction yet. It did seem like it was purposeful. But what about the Viltrumite? Raditz asked. From the recording, she seemed to be handling herself pretty well. Well, maybe that's the point, Peter offered, Raditz and Gamora both looking at him. The confusion on their faces growing by the second. If that person was with the others on the main faction, then maybe they could have stood a chance. Maybe Vegeta is counting on being able to take on that Viltra whatever in a one-on-one after the main team kicks the bucket. Raditz found himself nodding at Peter's logic. In fact, in the moment, he was almost mad that he didn't think of it. The Prince of all Saiyans making his grand escape, all while depriving the Frieza Force of their whole unit, including a young Viltrumite, which seemed to be a rare thing from Raditz's own memory. the ultimate means of spite. Peter, seeing that Raditz had begun agreeing with his theory, turned to Gamora, who looked slightly irritated. If your theory is correct, then we're still screwed. If Vegeta's forces lose due to his planning, they'll comb the whole planet looking for stragglers and... Which is why he probably has an escape route, with a working ship and knowledge of the space that can tow us out of here. Peter half pointed to Raditz. I'm sure he'll be happy to let us use his little plan once he realizes that his buddy is here, right? He elbowed Gamora. She clicked her tongue. Peter's logic seemed sound, but so did his logic when he landed them on this dirt ball. We won't be able to find out until we locate them, though, will we? He asked. Hey, look who's getting on board with the plan. He clapped Gamora on the back, the girl shooting him a death glare the second his hand made contact. That way. She pointed to an area roughly 1,000 feet away from them. At the rate they're clearing scout towers, by the time we get there, they will have just finished. All right then, Peter said, waving the other two with him. Time for a little reunion. He smiled at Raditz before walking ahead of the crowd. Gamora walked behind Raditz, half turning to him as they followed the path she had set out for them. Do you always let Quill drag you around like this? She asked, just quiet enough for Peter not to hear. He's bumbling around like an idiot. Raditz snorted slightly. You sound like me. Huh? Me when I first met Quill. Or at least my first few months being stuck with him. Raditz let a small smile drape across his face. I'm a Saiyan. Warriors of peace or not, we were still warriors. Fighters. A military. As such, we had structure, purpose, planning. Nothing that Quill seems to possess, Gamora said, irritation seeping into her face. I didn't think so either. I think that's something inherent to a species. Humans. Raditz replied. At least from the stories he's told me. Humans seem extravagant. The inventions he described, concert halls, theaters just for showing fiction. Entire halls and museums dedicated to the pursuit of fashion of all things. They definitely don't seem like a serious species then. I'm surprised they lasted this long, Gamora replied. I think it might be why they've lasted this long, Raditz said back, Gamora side-eyeing him in response. Peter was the first person in my entire life who told me that I didn't need to worry about my past anymore. Not about Frieza, not about my own people, not even about the Viltrumites. I didn't even know what being outside the Frieza Force looked like, until he showed me. Raditz turned to Gamora. He treats everything, even life or death situations, like they're all some sort of game. I honestly think he's incapable of taking things seriously. And that's somehow a good thing, Gamora asked. It's a good thing to me, Raditz replied. The Saiyans were always a powerful people, but I unfortunately wasn't the best they had to offer. I was considered a lower-class warrior. Nobody looked down on me or anything, Saiyans just weren't the type, but our people always have, well, protected the weak, since our existence. Since Yamoshi first drove the evil out of our species. It only stopped when Frieza's people invaded us. And I saw it in the faces of everybody, from my peers to my family, that the weak was starting to include me. I wasn't viewed as a warrior or a fellow comrade, I was viewed as somebody who needed protection. I think that's part of the reason Vegeta saved me, because he knew if I stayed with him, the Viltrumites would have seen me as nothing more than a weight dragging them down. Gamora met eyes with Raditz, seeing to her surprise that even as he talked, Raditz still didn't lose the smile on his face, like it had been permanently etched there. When I left, when I ran, I was just looking for my family, trying to find this Earth place they had disappeared to, trying to find protection and a place to hide. I could only feel, well, anger, frustration, fear. The odd thing is, since meeting Quill, I don't think I've actually smiled so much in my life. He's taken a lot of the pain out of being a Saiyan. He only lets me focus on the positives. The positives of being one of the last members of a dead race? She asked, the tone in her voice drawing Raditz in, almost like the premise was familiar to the girl. The positives in being able to carry on my people's legacy, and being able to protect people with my own power, and being able to use said power to knock around the occasional asshole, Raditz replied. It's weird, but in the presence of, well, in the absence of my people, and focusing on fun, I think I found more meaning in being a Saiyan than I did on a whole planet full of people like me. I even found the joy in getting stronger, something that's been difficult for Saiyans to find over the years, especially since there's so few of us now. And it's something I don't think I ever would have found without Quill. You might be giving the guy a bit too much credit, Gamora replied, looking at Peter, who was staring ominously in the distance as he walked, almost like he was on some kind of nature tour. Happiness and combat have a lot more to do with each other than you think. Believe me. Raditz turned to the girl. If you don't believe me, you can give it a shot. What, stumbling around with a smile on my face? I can't. I have a lot of things you need to do? Raditz asked, staring above him, like Peter had. In the moment, he saw the flitting of two objects through the air that disappeared in a flash. Oh, so that's what's happening, Raditz thought. Peter was keeping an eye on his surroundings, but he was turning that into a game too. He turned to see the grin on Peter's face. He had to suppress the snort building behind his nose. We all do, but just focusing on what you have to do, you're liable to go insane, and that won't be good for anyone. Gamora thought, despite constantly looking for a chance to take the Power Stone from the mess of people she got herself caught up in, she was still here, stuck with no end in sight. If she hadn't at least tried to pass the time, it would seem like she was in limbo, an eternal punishment with no end in sight, before she could continue on her quest. So, I might as well see what all the fuss is about, she admitted to herself, a slight smile crossing her face. These people, they called themselves the Guardians of the Galaxy. It was a ridiculous name if she ever heard one. But despite what Thanos had done to her, she was still technically a child. She supposed it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world to indulge that part of herself, at least for the time being. Twin strikes, Vegeta ordered in the air as he turned to Anissa, who nodded. After this, we'll finish the outer edges, so we'll be able to sit still for a moment. What, are you tired, Captain? Anissa asked. You can save your snark for after we're finished, Vegeta replied, his face not shifting even slightly. Anissa's small smile grew into a much larger one as she dove down, shattering the ground on the left side of the scroll building, shifting the area in its entirety. Dozens upon dozens of scrolls came pouring out of the area, ready to face her. Vegeta was nearly sure that it was all of them, the ones who were inside the building, supposedly protecting it, which meant that now was the perfect time to make sure there wasn't a building to protect. In an instant, he appeared to the right of the building, charging a ki blast so full of power that it lit up the sky in the area, outshining the sun. Gallic. Vegeta's voice boomed through the air, half the scrolls confronting Anissa turning to face their destruction in horror. Anissa smiled at the ones too scared to face the shine at their backs, their eyes still locked onto her. Gun, she said, her voice drowned out by the booming roar of the ki in Vegeta's hand interacting with the atmosphere. She simply stood there as the building crumbled, pushed aside and obliterated, its shards raining down upon the bodies of half the scrolls, piercing through them like rains of gunfire. The ones who the shrapnel missed only had a moment to react before Anissa appeared in front of them, piercing each and every one of their bodies with a single hand, their lifeless husk of corpses dropping to the ground within the next second. She let out a sigh with her effort as Vegeta floated to the ground to meet her. So, how is Kui doing? She asked as he walked over to the ashes of what had once been the last of the scroll encampments. Nappa pulled his disappearing act already, so not good. If you want to hear for yourself. He tapped the side of his face, a motion that she knew meant her earpiece, so she reached for it, clicking it on. Damn it! Where did they keep coming from? And where did that monkey run off to? I know he didn't die already. Kui's shrill voice rang. I don't know, sir. We can't detect his power. Ah! Another voice screamed before fading into static. The voice of Raspberry, if Vegeta had to guess. You useless morons! Must I do everything? Kui screamed. We might be able to call for reinforcements, sir. The voice of Apol rang. Vegeta still might be. We will not be relying on those useless mongrels, Kui shouted. Form up, men. Let's just see how tough those Super Skrulls think they are, once they face the full force of the Kui Legion. Kui Legion? Anissa asked, turning her communicator off. Seems a good name for such a useless team. Vegeta responded, Anissa laughing in response. Not a small, composed laugh like she normally did. It was much, much more emphatic, a laugh that moved her whole body up and down like she was possessed. Vegeta chuckled a bit in response to his subordinate's actions. I know Kui is a joke, but even he's not that funny, Vegeta replied. Anissa just found herself continuing on. She couldn't help herself. This was her first true mission against the Frieza Force with her team. She had worked with Vegeta against them for a while, years at this point, but it hadn't gone this far. This was, essentially, her first time fully placing her trust in her team, in an event that, no matter how unlikely, could get her killed. In fact, the odds of her getting killed would raise dramatically if her own people found out about this, and a Viltrumite death wasn't painless. It seemed pretty unlikely. Their gambit did look like it was going to pay off, but the fact that she was taking that risk just made her happier. If anything, that was the core of what she was feeling right now. Happiness. It wasn't a common feeling for Viltrumites. Happiness and pride were often lumped together as one and the same, something that she used to think was true of the Saiyans, but there was more to it than she ever could have seen. Pride might have been part of it, but the pride in others, and a goal of victory that they could see through together, knowing that they could rely on each other, trust each other if something went wrong. That was happiness. It had to be. What an interesting emotion, she thought to herself. She looked forward to seeing more of it in the future. She wiped her eyes as she forced her laughter to finish. I take it we're not getting involved until the moment Kui goes down, she asked, her regular tone of voice slowly creeping back into control. Indeed. Nappa will be waiting at the city's entrance, keeping his own ki as low as possible to remain undetectable, Vegeta replied. But we're done with our part. What do we do till then? Anissa asked, glancing back at the explosions ringing out over the horizon into the cityscape. For now, we remain watchful, Vegeta replied. Other than that, I say we can simply... He froze, spotting a shadow drifting out over the forest. One clad in smoking armor, from the Frieza Force. Vegeta cocked his head to the side, Anissa turning her head to face whatever Vegeta was. That's odd. It would appear the Kui Legion has some defectors. Vegeta crossed his arms. No, not likely. From the looks of things, he appears to be glancing back at the city. I think he's trying to get reinforcements, so he might be looking for us, trying to drag us back into the fray. He probably located our position based on the city's communication grid going down in key locations. She posited, clicking her tongue. Of course, it might have been too much to ask that every member of Kui's Legion be as prideful and suicidal as he was. That could prove to be a problem. He might have a scouter turned on. One wrong word and our plan gets back to Kui. Which gets back to Frieza. Vegeta pinched his brow. Alright, I suppose it's time for a round of acting then. Who would have thought leading a rebellion would have so much improv work? Anissa shrugged, adopting a limp and striking herself in the face just hard enough to draw out the smallest amount of blood. In the very brief moments before the person in the shadows graced their presence, it was a pool. He had just heard him whining about wanting to come get them. Apparently he didn't wait that long. What a coward, she thought to herself. He seemed almost out of breath as he kneeled before them, sucking in air like a vacuum, trying to replenish the energy that he had lost, the empty reserve of oxygen that he had in his body. Finally, he groaned. Finally? It must have only been a few mere moments, maybe a few minutes at most. He must have felt like it was longer, Anissa reasoned. She supposed it was likely the near-death experience. They did tend to have that kind of effect on people, at least from what she'd heard. And judging from the fact that every inch of this man's body was covered in bruises and cuts, jutted out points where she assumed that bones on his body had been broken, he had likely experienced a few near-death experiences on the battlefield today. A fool might have been a pushover, far more than even Kui, but still, she found herself impressed that the scrolls could have torn him apart so easily, in such a short amount of time. Ah, a fool, I see you caught up to us, Anissa groaned out, in a hoarse voice that gave the impression that she was dying. These scrolls, they're a lot tougher than we expected. Apua looked down to Vegeta, whose eyes were shaking like he was having trouble even focusing them. It was a key feature that many had who experienced great injury. A good way of selling it. And from the looks of things, Kui bought it. Damn, they got to you two as well, he grunted. It doesn't matter. Kui needs assistance. He is your squadron's commander. You need to push through the pain. We have taken out a good deal of scrolls, but they just keep coming. If we can provide them a new target... Anissa's eye twitched. He wanted to use them as human shields. She was surprised at her own irritation in the moment. It was definitely a tactic she would have used not too long ago. She spat on the ground. Even if she was playing along with the scene at hand, she couldn't make things too easy for Kui. That would make him suspicious. Kui can't even handle a city. Wasn't he the one who begged for that assignment the second Vegeta brought it up? It's not our fault he doesn't know his limitations. Apua growled, lifting the blaster from his belt. This time both Anissa and Vegeta had to fight the urge not to break out in laughter. You're weak right now. I know full well you won't be able to block the blaster fire unless you can focus your ki. Do you think you can do that in your condition? He pressed against his scouter. Your power levels right now are barely in the hundreds. Anissa bit her tongue, fighting not to let a single bit of amusement slither its way out of her. Vegeta's training on suppressing his power level likely helped a great deal in the moment. They had worked on that technique for months, refining his ability to appear like nothing on the radar, so the others wouldn't be conspicuous at his sudden power leaps. As for her, those little devices were able to analyze the smart atoms that made up a Viltrumite's physiology, the things that made a great deal of their strength and power possible, and how effective they were. The strongest of the Viltrumites had smart atoms that worked so overtime that under a microscope you could essentially see their skin vibrating. She had trained, just like she had used the atoms in her body to fly or lift buildings, to simply slow their movement, as much as feasibly possible. And when she did, even to the most well-trained of scouters, she would appear as nothing but a speck of insignificance. This skill would be useless outside of any circumstance than the one she found herself in now, working with Vegeta. Outside of being in a place where she would need to appear weak and small to stay under the radar. There was an element of fun to it. She felt herself cackling at the idea that somebody wasn't scared of her, especially when most of the galaxy was, and especially at the times when they should be. Fine, she groaned, dripping her eyelids down like she was struggling to stay awake. Apua gestured his weapon towards them. The pair knew that all they needed to do was to wait this out, just wait for a single moment when he wasn't looking. So, Anissa chose to walk forward, Vegeta propping himself up behind her. In Apua's mind, Vegeta was the larger threat. He had never not been vocal about his hatred for the Frieza Force. There was always an air of defiance around him, even when he fell in line, so Apua focused on him the most, which was his fatal mistake. He turned his head just enough for his glare to not lie on Anissa for a moment. She saw Vegeta giving her the go-ahead in his eye. The girl took a moment. One strike. That was all she needed to kill Apua instantly. She formed her hand into a flat blade, and when she was ready to bring it forth, something flashed before her eyes. It looked like lightning. Apua tumbled into the side, a smoking dot on his chest where his armor had been completely burned through, scorching like it was on fire. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough to pierce him completely, like Anissa was sure she could have. He looked in the direction the lightning came from, ready to turn whatever scroll had just kept her from resolving her problem into a lovely spray of green ash, only to stop in her entirety, her eyes widening in shock. Before her didn't stand a scroll. There stood a boy, who looked a little younger than she was, one in a mask. She couldn't see his face, but she could see some of his skin, and it didn't look scroll. What especially wasn't scroll was his hair. The way it moved, it looked strange. No, it looked familiar, almost Viltrumite. She almost considered Saiyan for a moment, but his hair wasn't black. He did look far too similar to their species for it to be coincidence, though. Skrulls were shapeshifters, so maybe it could have been a trick? Boom! Gotcha! Peter's voice rung through the air, and almost immediately Anissa decided that no Skrull in the cosmos would speak that way, even as a trick. She couldn't decide what to do before Apua had shuffled to his feet. Clearly he was the slightest bit tougher than Anissa had given him credit for. Who the hell are you? Apua grunted out. His scouter was still intact. Vegeta clicked his tongue. If only this mystery assailant had aimed the slightest bit higher. Oh, we're just a couple of nutballs guarding the galaxy. Peter smiled under his mask, waiting for the person snarling at him to ask what people always did when they heard that line. We're? Apua's hoarse voice hung through the air, the sound ringing through Peter's eardrums like music that pumped through his headphones. And quickly, another sound added to the chorus, the sound of a foot striking Apua's skull, skipping the man across the floor and dropping right in front of Anissa. You were right, Quill. He did say it. Gamora cracked her neck. Good guess. Apul quickly pressed a hand to his scouter, watching those in the area. To his horror, he couldn't pick up their power levels. They hadn't relied on ki, solar energy, smart atoms. They probably had abilities that his scouter just couldn't account for yet. He cursed himself, glaring at Anissa. What the hell are you doing? Don't just look at them, Apul ordered. Anissa bit back a groan, nodding to the man. It was certainly annoying, but she could take care of this mess quickly. Whatever these idiots' plan was, they were very unlucky to be sharing space with her right now. She shifted her foot, launching herself towards the one in the jacket and mask, only to realize too late that she had missed. She blinked as she went through the memory in her mind. Did he dodge her? No, he couldn't have reacted to her that quick. Strike one. A voice came from what she had called the masked fool in her mind. She grunted, turning to face him once more. She could feel the air of smugness on his face without even being able to see it. Oh yeah, right, you guys don't have baseball. Man, people don't really know how to have fun in space, do they? Peter said. Anissa quickly moved again, launching a punch directed at the boy's skull that somehow also missed. Once more she played the scene in her head, but he didn't move quickly. Sure, the boy seemed fast for a regular person, but that's when the memory replayed clearly in her mind. He moved when she decided to punch, but before she actually went through with it. In that maybe 1-2 second delay between thought and action, he read her aim and dodged that. That was incredibly interesting, she had to admit. She felt herself crack a grin. She definitely wouldn't have appreciated a skill like that before. It wasn't anything that a person would need, especially not someone strong enough to be what she used to consider a real fighter. She'd be impressed if she wasn't so irritated. This meant the fight would take much longer to finish, significantly so, and that wouldn't do. So, if the boy she had initially pegged for a clown couldn't be finished off in a single motion, he would just have to make an attack that he couldn't dodge. His feet were planted on the soil right now. What were the chances he could fly? Low enough that she was more than willing to take the risk. Anissa lifted her hands above her head and clasped them together. The same motion she had made to smash skulls into the pavement, only this time it wasn't a skull she was aiming for, it was the ground beneath her feet. One swift motion would pulverize the area, everything it stood on. Of course, that might make it hard for Apul to buy her whole too hurt to move act, but she would have to take care of that when the time came. She might even be able to take care of him in the confusion. But before she could make her motion, she found herself nearly blinded by a strange light, one that seemed all too familiar to her. A key orb? But it wasn't coming from Vegeta's direction. Did these people have a key user on their team as well? The answer was confirmed for her when the white-hot sphere made impact with the skin on her face, blasting the girl backward as she skid across the floor, barely having time enough to summon the strength to stop herself before she catapulted clear across the forest. They didn't just have a key user. He wasn't a bad one. The smoke began clearing, allowing her a slightly better look at him, at the spiky hair that ran down his back, and the scouter attached to his face, the tail slightly poking out from behind his back. A Saiyan? She felt her breath catch in her throat. She thought that she knew about the Saiyans who had left. All of them. The ones who had run off to Earth. Vegeta and Nappa. Then who was this guy? A question that Apul seemed to know the answer to based on the way he was choking on his own breath. Wait, but didn't Vegeta kill? He stopped dead, a keyblade through the center of his chest being the cause. This time, the key did belong to Vegeta. You trick... Vegeta quickly moved the blade up, splitting him in half and leaving him dead on the spot. Ow, dang. Can you do that? Peter turned to Raditz, who simply remained still, watching Vegeta as steadily as he could. Like he was nervous that the boy would somehow pounce at any moment. Okay, Vegeta replied, raising his gun back up towards Anissa. Gamora closed in, from behind on the duo of the Frieza Force defectors. Well hey, Raditz, I was right, he elbowed Raditz, who half nodded, his face still failing to register a single emotion. Vegeta did, at least right now, seem like he held no loyalty to the Frieza Force. Yet the girl behind him attacked at the first opportunity. Raditz cracked his knuckles. I'll take the Viltrumite. He narrowed his eyes. So, you know what species I belong to. Anissa took a fighting stance. Not only was the boy in front of her a Saiyan, but he was clearly from Frieza Force space. Especially if he knew of Viltrumite just at the sight. Which he clearly had to in order to recognize her so quickly. It meant he had to be a survivor of Planet Sadala's implosion. So were the others. But if there was a survivor that they hadn't accounted for, how many were there? The implications were pretty immense. That doesn't mean that you're capable of fighting me, let alone by yourself, Anissa snarled, almost pushing herself off the ground before lowering her fist. We could level this entire area. We could signal to the other stragglers from the fight in the city that we're here, and maybe even bring the entire Frieza force down on top of both of us. Or, she nearly felt herself choking on her next words. We could talk. Talk. Raditz's voice sounded like someone had just punched the wind out of him in an instant. His shock radiated through his body so heavily that he was practically frozen in place. I thought you Viltra whatever's punched first had asked questions never, Peter chimed in. From what I heard, one asking questions only happens in a torture chamber, Gamora replied, clutching her blade, preparing a strike at the girl's back. She was fairly sure her gathered group could handle her. After all, Gamora had been intent on killing her father. If she couldn't handle a lowly child like this, then she had no place keeping such a dream in her heart. And considering the first time that she had ever met the so-called Guardians of the Galaxy, they nearly fought her to a standstill, she could rely on them to have the same sort of grit. Consider it a once-in-a-lifetime chance, then, Anissa replied. My curiosity has overwhelmed my desire to fight you. Since when does a Viltrumite possess curiosity? Raditz asked, expecting an outburst but receiving none. In fact, the Viltrumite in front of him almost seemed to agree with him, her face showing no sign of confusion. In fact, it almost had an air of understanding. Just what the hell was going on? Raditz shook his head. He wasn't going to get caught up in a Viltrumite trick. He refused. He launched towards Anissa, only to have his fist caught by the girl. She made no counterattack. I kindly ask you to reconsider, she groaned out. Like hell. Raditz spun himself vertically, landing a scissor kick directly on top of her head. Or at least that's what he thought happened. The leg stopped right before it made contact, held up by what appeared to be the white-gloved hand of Vegeta. That's more than enough, Raditz. His former prince's words rang. Wait, so this is Raditz? Anissa asked, putting together the pieces of the puzzle she had formed in her mind's eye. Suddenly, a lot had made a lot more sense, and she was very glad that she hadn't continued attacking him. I thought he had gone with the rest of his family, that they were at the far ends of the cosmos by now. As did I, Vegeta replied, letting go of the foot of his former subordinate, who floated down beside Peter. Gamora even put her blade aside as she moved beside the two of them, not fully knowing what to expect. Evidently, that was a mistake on my part, Vegeta said. You protected her? Raditz said. It was the only thing he could think to say. The only thought that he could force his mouth to form. I did, Vegeta replied, pointing to the body of a pool laid out for Raditz to see. And I killed that one. I trust that you're capable of putting the pieces together. You're not loyal to the Empire, and you're working with her, so... Neither is she? Raditz replied, his throat feeling dry at the words. They didn't make sense. Viltrumites were monsters. Demons behind faces that looked enough like Saiyans to lower their guard. They had all laughed at Frieza's feet, nearly the second he gave them away to kill without consequence. So why would Vegeta stand beside one so easily? Why would one show restraint when he attacked? Why? There isn't much to betray when it comes to the Empire, Anissa replied, crossing her arms, drawing Raditz's eyes towards her. They never had my loyalty to begin with. They don't even have each other's. It's taken me an embarrassingly long time to realize that, I will admit. It's one of their great weaknesses, and one of the ways we intend on tearing them apart, Vegeta replied, Raditz looking between the two of them. You mean to tell me a Viltrumite is going to help wipe out her own kind? Raditz replied. Even Gamora nodded at this point. While she never saw the Viltrumites as an especially important group to keep in mind, especially since she hadn't much intended on entering their space, like every other powerful race, she did know a bit about them, especially how they treated dissenters. She was pretty sure the brutal torture methods that were described to her were a good part of the reason why a Viltrumite dissenter was an oxymoron. And this girl was willing to risk that? And to kill off her own people, no less? Her own family, more than likely. It was just like her. Gamora put her sword away, before looking to Raditz. Maybe the exchange of words wouldn't be such a bad idea. Are you kidding me? Raditz replied harshly. You did say Vegeta was a genius, dude, Peter replied, dropping his mask as he put his gun to his side. If the guy's so smart, he probably has an explanation for this. An explanation? It defies explanation, Raditz replied back. There's no world where anything like this, like her, makes any sort of sense. Vegeta smirked. Really? It does to me. At least as much sense as finding you out in a particularly dangerous sector of the cosmos after I sent you to safety. Raditz felt himself swallow hard in that moment. The eyes of Vegeta almost reminded him of his father whenever he scolded him. Only Raditz had far more to fear from his old captain than he ever did his old man. I, for one, think this little chat could only benefit us in the long run. Don't you? He said, not waiting for an answer as he pulled aside a stone from the building that he had annihilated, sitting on it as though it were an ordinary chair. Evidently, we have some catching up to do. The trio of aliens who had walked the Earth for most of their children's lives at this point had landed a good distance away from the city, barely making out the New York skyline in the distance. Bardock sighed. He wasn't particularly fond of most cities outside of Wakanda, places where he would have to hide, to blend in with the people around him. Unfortunately, he didn't have much of a choice right now. What does the signal say? He asked the two behind him. It dropped out, Hine replied. Like right off the radar. Which probably means Hydra, or Red Ribbon. Whoever, know that we're here. They're basically inviting us to poke around and find them, Weasley replied. Almost like they're challenging us? Hine whispered, a slight bit of sweat moving down her face. That was definitely a bit nerve-wracking. She already knew what these people were capable of from before, and now they had more time to prepare. Granted, not much, but she had a feeling they wouldn't need a great deal of time to top the monstrosity they built last time. If that's the case, then let's hurry up and find His Majesty, Bardock replied, walking into the city from its border. T'Chaka was pulling on one of his connections in this place, so if anybody knew where to look next, or more accurately, which door Bardock would have to knock down, it would be him. He just hoped the King of Wakanda wouldn't mind them dropping in on him so quickly. Hey everybody, as always, it's really cool to see you guys back again, and thanks a ton for checking back in on Earth OCU. This video was both a lot of fun and a bit difficult to work on because the last few weeks have been very hectic for me, so I'm glad I was able to get it out for y'all. It was a lot of fun writing Vegeta and Raditz seeing each other for the first time in a really long time. And even though it was a bit on the briefer side, it was a lot of fun trying to write Diana adjusting to her new situation, which is definitely something I intend on writing a lot more of as things go on. I really hope you all had an awesome day, and I look forward to seeing you in the future. In the meantime, if you liked this video, please be sure to let me know by leaving a like, and please subscribe to make sure you don't miss out on the future of this or any other series that I work on. And make sure to leave a comment to let me know what you thought of this one. In the meantime, I've been your captain, and it's been a pleasure taking you on another tour of the strongest Earth in the multiverse. I'll see you next time.